Welcome. Once again, my name is Douglas Grummins. Thank you for joining us today. Today, I'm going to continue from the book 10,000 Ways, the first book I wrote, and continue on with that. And this will be Chapter 6. But before we get into Chapter 6, I just wanted to say a few words. If you've never listened to any of my recordings or have never heard anything that I've put out, I invite you to go on a journey with me and go and listen to all the recordings I put on YouTube, and I think you'd be quite amazed and glad you did. Chapter 6 is entitled Back in Texas. Anyway, the text starts off by saying, in May of 2009, we moved back to Texas, Maria and I did. And I found a job with a company right out of Pearland. Then we found a house within a mile of my new job. With the proceeds from the sale of our old house in Virginia Beach, we were able to buy a nice home in Pearland, with enough money remaining to purchase a new skydiving rig. My old rig was not designed for free fly, so I sold it and bought a winged skydiving rig. It was slightly used, but looked and still looks like it's brand new. It has an older main parachute in it called the Sabre 1. The Sabre 1 is a great parachute. It flies great and it flares really well. The only problem is it has a tendency to open fast upon openings, and sometimes very hard and fast. I had a lot of neck breakers until an experienced packer who knew how to pack my parachute showed me how to pack it properly. Now every opening was soft and on heading. I love living so close to such a great drop zone. This is Skydive Spaceland in Houston. If you haven't never had a chance to go out there and get a jump in, I highly recommend it. But anyway, if I get off of work early enough, I race home and grab my gear and off I go. I can usually squeeze 1 or 2 jumps in before they close for the evening. I have a ritual that I perform before every jump. First, I close my eyes and center myself. Almost instantly, my mind stills and I have a Zen moment. And when my mind is still, I become entirely centered. Even though I do not feel any separation between God and myself, I always say a prayer before loading on the plane. And I say, God, use my body, ride with me. I'm doing all this for you. And it works every time. I truly feel the divine presence coursing through my veins. When I leave the airplane, there's a sense of freedom that only a skydiver knows. I mostly like to practice free flying. Free flying entails either a sit stance or a head down body posture. And one of the two, the sit fly is easier. It took loads of jumps before I could keep this sit posture all the way down to opening time. While free flying, you fall much faster with an average speed of about 170 miles an hour. Heads down is much harder than the sit posture, and it takes a lot more time to be proficient at it. I have found a good way to practice heads down is to backflip out of the plane and try to stay heads down for as long as I can hold it, and then rotate into my sit stance when I lose it. I set rules for myself with skydiving. The first rule was I fly a bigger parachute than most jumpers with my level of experience. Usually most jumpers downsize once every year, and at my age I enjoy a nice slow canopy ride. Second rule, I always open no lower than 3,500 feet. My philosophy is I want some extra time to clear a malfunction or a cutaway if necessary. The third rule is if the wind is blowing the bottom of the flag above the vertical point, then I don't jump. The saying goes, it's better to be on the ground wishing you were up there than up there wishing you were on the ground. I've known my wife Maria for half of my life now. We faced the world as a team for over 22 years. In 2010, we decided to end our marriage, and this was extremely hard for me. My heart was hurt, but I often told her that we must follow and stay with love. If a couple stays married and there is no love between them, then it's unhealthy for both people. The Tantra philosophy is to be a bee, always stay with love. People believe that enlightened people no longer suffer or no longer feel pain, and that simply is not true. The truth is enlightened people feel things totally. They feel things deeper than others because when they feel pain, they face it with the complete totality. We deal with things 100% in the present moment. Therefore, you feel things much deeper and much stronger than the people that push things down into their subconscious and bury their feelings. It's better to express them, go through them, and understand much deeper. and then and be over and be done with it. I drank Maria's wine for 22 years, and now that I have stopped, I have one hell of a hangover. A wise mystic once said, if something brings you happiness in this world, then it can bring you sadness as well, enlightened or not. I was split because I wanted Maria to be happy and stay with love, yet I was sad because our love had ended. Just like the sadness I felt whenever I finished a spiritual book that lifted my soul, now that this chapter of my life was over, I cried and held nothing back. I released a love that has lasted for thousands of lives, yet I let the tears go. Maria and I grew apart. She was never attracted to the beach like I was. My life was centered around the ocean, and I called the ocean my mother and the mountains and sky my father. I thought that Maria would be the last woman I would ever be with. My energies have risen so much that I had to stop meditating as often as I wished so I could keep Maria physically happy. And now I am left with a question that my friend Chris asked me, do you need to be with another woman? I replied that there was no need, but I have become accustomed to a woman's touch. The softness a woman brings into your life is so beautiful. God is my beloved, my heart is eternally bonded with his, but still I wanted to share this life with someone. I hardly ever ask God for anything. He has given me so much, but I did pray and I asked for someone to share this life with. The only thing I really wanted from this new person was to see the joy in her face, the joy that only a person who knows how to live has. Then I said to God, and if she surfs, then that would be really cool too. So Maria and I made friends with a couple musicians before we split up, and these two people we could call Keith and Rachel. They were there for me when I needed them to be. One weekend they said they had a surprise for us. Then they took me to one of their friends' house where I met a group of people who became my closest friends. This group of friends welcomed me into their lives. The group consisted of musicians, surfers, and meditators. We usually all got together on the weekends while the musicians performed on their instruments, and I usually told at least one Zen or Sufi story. The organizer of the group, who called himself Zen Clarity, surfed and was really into Zen Buddhism. So he and I became very close. Zen really loved to hear all of my stories. And there was Mike, a drummer. Mike had been surfing when he was younger and really wanted to go surf with me sometime. Then there was Chris. Chris was the lead singer of the Zen's band. Chris loved my Zen stories. He always listened with an open heart, and we also became really close friends. It was Chris that came up with the name for our group. We called ourselves the Tribe. Every year, Keith and Rachel went to the Renaissance Festival in Texas, and this year their entire tribe decided to go to the fair and camp all weekend. I borrowed my brother's tent, and we went to the fair's campground. Keith and Rachel camped with a group of campers who we met up with. The group was pretty large and welcomed us openly. As nightfall approached, the group built a large fire because the nights at the campground became very cold. And our tribe fit in well with the new group as well, as we all gathered around the fire. And Zen was really good at spinning the fire poi. Zen brought fire poi to entertain the group, and Zen can spin the fire poi and dance in circles while he does it. Mike joined in with the others playing djembe drums one night at the camp. Mike made friends with two female drummers named Angela and Sephora. The people I met at the fair were some of the most beautiful people I'd ever met. Every person I encountered had a talent or a good story to tell. And we would sit around the fire telling stories about our lives and sharing a good joke with one of the other campers passed out drunk with his feet up in the fire, giving everybody a good laugh. I met Angela and Sephora while hanging out in Mike's tent, and I told them that I was a surfer, and they said they would love to come down to the beach and go surf with me. So the next weekend after fair, Mike and the girls and I drove down to Surfside Beach. Angela had surfed a couple times, and Sephora had her own board. I let Angela try my Eaton 8-foot board, and the waves were pretty big that day. So after hanging out on the inside, smaller breaks with the girls, Mike and I paddled out to the outside. We were surfing good chest-high waves, and then out of the corner of my eye, I saw this young lady was paddling out to surf with us. It was Angela. I paddled over to her and I said, "Wow, you made it out here. Now let's ride some waves." The three of us surfed for about an hour, and I was wondering about Sephora. I rode a wave in and sat on the beach with her, where Sephora was trying to sit, and I just kept her company. I told her my wife and I just split up, and I was feeling down about the whole thing. Sephora said, "Why don't you come to camp this weekend instead of staying home?" Thinking that would be a good idea, I agreed and went back to the Renaissance Fair the following weekend. I was the first one to arrive at fair, and I was feeling very down. I felt like leaving the campground when the girls showed up. They took me in, one under each arm, and we went around and visited every campfire and every group that was open for visitors. I shared my favorite Zen stories with them, and they really helped me have a good time. I really felt like they were two angels sent to help me out. After that weekend of surfing with the girls and everything, and going to camp the next weekend after that, the girls invited me to come camp out with them in Galveston the next weekend. And Angela called me up and said, "Hey, we'll meet up at the Voodoo Lounge and go dancing and then hang out at the Strand." And the Strand is the main party street in downtown Galveston. And I met the girls outside the Voodoo Lounge, and we went inside. The girls did not tell me that they were meeting up with a fellow female drummer friend of theirs. They introduced me to their friend Valerie, and Valerie and I sat down with each other and enjoyed getting to know each other. The first thing Valerie asked me was, "Doug, do you surf?" And that's when I found out that she liked to surf and how much she loves the ocean. Valerie was unique and beautiful, and I found that very appealing. Valerie introduced me to some of her fellow surfing friends, and we all shared surf stories around a fire pit in the back of the club. We exchanged numbers and became friends. Just coming out of a 20-year relationship, I still needed time to heal, and in that time, Valerie and I kept in contact, Facebooking and calling each other. Winter came, and I felt the need to take a trip back to Utah. Out of all my friends, I felt like Zen would appreciate coming with me the most. Zen tried snowboarding when he was 11 and said he would love to try it again. We flew into Salt Lake City and caught a shuttle park bus right into Park Lake City. We had to take a shuttle because there was a mix-up at the airport with the rental car. And I told Zen, "There's a reason why this happened. We just have to not seen it yet." I rented a condo at the base of the Canyon Ski Resort. I had rented from the landlord before, so I knew it would be awesome. By the time we arrived to the condo, it was nightfall. There was just enough light out to take Zen out to the learning area and show him some basics of snowboarding. At first, I held on to him until he understood how the board worked. It was not long before he managed to be riding down the gentle slope all on his own. The next morning, we awoke to 2 feet of fresh powder. We rode the lift up to the top of the first mountain. Our first run was a beginner green run, and something easy for Zen to ride. The powder was thick and on that trail, so I felt something a little steeper was needed. So back at the top of the mountain, I said, "Zen, follow me." And without letting him see where we were going, I launched him down a black diamond run. I figured the powder was 2 feet thick everywhere, so he would be all right. I would ride about 100 feet down and stop and look back, and there was Zen riding about 20 feet and then face planting over and over. He was determined and having a blast learning from his mistakes. By the third day, Zen had really got the hang of snowboarding. Then, when the last day of snowboarding came, we rode to the lift to the top of the mountain. Zen was sitting there buckling up his bindings, and I sat down next to him. While looking out across the valley, I said to my friend, "This is what it feels like to be enlightened. You can see the whole valley from up here, and you can also see all the mountaintops as well. Enlightenment is a broader viewpoint, a higher perspective towards looking at any type of situation." We did find out why we ended up renting the car in Park City. We drove into Salt Lake City for an evening, and after several hours of dancing and break away from the text, I met a young lady named Cinnamon Hadley, and we got to know each other almost intimately that evening. She was a beautiful, beautiful woman and very unique in every way. And anyway, this is 2018, and she passed away a couple weeks ago, and I had to say goodbye to that friend. And then a week later, my father died, and I had to say goodbye to him. But anyway, we move on. I mean, if we don't learn from our experiences and enjoy everything that's given to us, then life can be futile. But anyway, back to the text. And meeting so many great people in Salt Lake City, we decided to head back. As we left the nightclub, the snow started to come down. Even though it's a highway pass back up to Park City, the snow was getting too slippery for most cars. Everyone was pulling over, and we lost traction a couple of times, but we kept moving up the hill. The shuttle bus from the airport had laid out tracks for us to stay in. Besides us, the shuttle bus was the only vehicle on the road. Our little Ford rental car had outstanding traction control. 7 months passed before I realized that Valerie was the woman I was looking for. I know I jumped from subject to subject, but my wounds were healed now, and I got to know Valerie a little bit better. I did not know that all the tears that I cried for Maria fertilized the soil for my new love for Valerie to grow. When I fell in love with Maria, I was not enlightened. This time it was different. With awareness, I could see that you not only fall, but you rise as well. And Valerie loves the ocean more than any person I'd ever met. All of those close to her have dubbed her the Queen of Galveston. When we first met, she surfed on the inside. I brought a friend down to Galveston, and the three of us went out. And the surf was about 5 feet that day. And once my friend and I got out to the outside, I turned around to see where Valerie was, and she was not there. She was staying on the inside. No one ever took the time to show her how to ride her board. I put her on one of my boards and showed her where to lie on the board and how to paddle over the waves. Valerie had never been on the outside before. Her shoulder was in pain, so I towed her out behind me by her grabbing my leash. I pushed her into some good waves, and every time I pushed her into a wave, I watched the wave from behind, and she nailed it. 2 seconds would pass, and then I would see her head pop up. Bloop! And she had no fear. She really went for it. The stoke she got from the waves that I pushed her into gave her the strength to paddle past all the white water and get herself back out on the outside, all on her own. Soon she was surfing right at my side. We made several trips together in Texas, finding the best waves. We traveled through several storms, chasing waves. It was uncanny and bizarre how many times we scored beautiful waves. It was almost like God was preparing us for something. One day we were watching a documentary about a couple on a safari. That's when I suggested to Valerie that we should go on a safari ourselves. We talked about it and decided to go to Hawaii for our first trip. Maria never wanted to go anywhere tropical, so after all these years, I would finally get to go somewhere tropical like Hawaii. Whenever one of my friends back in Virginia Beach made a trip to Hawaii, he would train for months to get in shape for this trip. Val and I surfed every day we could. We ran on the treadmill and we pushed out sit-ups and got in shape for our trip. Almost every conversation was about how surfers respect and treat each other, both in and out of the water. I always used to use the examples of etiquette so Valerie would be able to get respect while we surfed in Hawaii. I bought a new rusty gun surfboard for the trip and broke it in during a couple of big days in Texas. I also had a surprise for Val. I called Buttons Kahulio Kalani and booked a surf lesson with him on the North Shore. Once we arrived in Hawaii, we made our way up to Turtle Bay Resort on the North Shore. It was dark by the time we checked in, and the waves were not even waist high. But the waves where we were produced, they picked up for the next several days. The view from our hotel was amazing. We overlooked a beautiful cove and woke up to see 10 to 15 foot waves, all in beautiful blue water. The waves in the cove started out pretty small, so we grabbed our boards and decided to give this spot a try. And this would be my first time to surf over a reef. The inside waves were only waist high, so we first walked down to the beach to check out our exit spot, and the whole cove was lined with coral reef, so we were a little scared and intimidated by it. But we planned our paddle out and our paddle in, so we were set. We paddled out and caught some beautiful waist-high waves. Then the waves picked up, so we decided to paddle in. Now the waves were breaking heavy, like 20 feet from shore, and I told Val that we had to time it, and you had to just time it just right so that the wave wouldn't crash you down over the almost bare reef. I told Val just to wait for my cue, but a small wave came and she took off and took it to shore. As she rode the wave, I could see that she was okay. She was so worried about her board, or scratching and dinging her board. The next thing I saw, she was on shore with no major cuts or scrapes. Then it was my turn. I waited for the lull between waves and took off like a bat out of hell. I made it over the reef and planted my feet into the sand, and after that experience, I knew we needed local knowledge. I've surfed all over the United States, both east and west coast, but I have never surfed over a shallow reef with razor-sharp coral. Hawaii demands respect, and I remember the movie North Shore. Young Rick goes to Hawaii after winning a surf contest in Arizona at a wave pool. He paddled into pipe without knowing anything about surfing real oceans. And when I say pipe, I mean the bonsai pipeline. And he gets clobbered. He meets a local guru who takes him the time to teach him all about waves in the ocean and the Hawaiian culture. And he makes Rick ride old Hawaiian boards with no fins on them, and he works him on a different board till he somewhat masters each one. And Rick has to learn to ride every one on the island, starting with the easiest and then moving up to the more advanced waves. I felt I needed the same start. It's better to start out easy and get accustomed to the speed of and characteristics of the waves in Hawaii. The next day we met up with Buttons and his nephew for our private lessons. Buttons is a Hawaiian legend. I remember seeing this guy on many video clips pulling maneuvers off on waves that nobody had even seen or thought about before, like 360s and switch stance and all kinds of crazy stuff. We surfed at Puena Point, a nice gentle break to the east of Haleiwa. And Buttons paddled out with me, and his nephew stayed with Val. Buttons and I rode a couple of waves on the inside and then paddled out into some bigger waves where the reef was. Buttons said, "That's a reef. Are you okay with that?" And I said, "Sure, no problem." The vibe in the air was beautiful. We had pristine weather and the water was beautiful. And we were surfing with a legend. I would ride a wave and then Buttons would ride one right behind me. And he stayed really close to me to make sure I was, safe at all times and didn't get drifting away from him. He was a true professional who loves the ocean and he loves his work. And an absolutely wonderful person to ever meet. But unfortunately, Buttons passed away a couple years back. But after we went to Hawaii, but Buttons would paddle right up to me, and then he'd say, "Doug, follow me back out." And after about an hour or two, I told Buttons, "I've got this. I'm comfortable now. I think Val wants to surf with you some." So Buttons paddled in and surfed with Val. And Val has only just begun her surfing adventure. And to surf with one of the greatest legends in Hawaii really made her day. We surfed with a legend in Hawaii, and life was pretty good to us that day. The next day, I felt we needed to find a spot that both Val and I could surf together. Then we drove into Haleiwa, and there was a nice clean wave right in town. The wave had a nice eastward push to it, and it was super, super clean. Val had never really been in a lineup before, so she had to stay pretty close to me. I was so proud of her. She held her place and rode many waves. She paddled back out to me and said she surfed right next to a big turtle. The turtles were everywhere. The current was strong and positioning was tough. I got snaked on a beautiful right-hander, more than once, I'd have to say, but I tucked under the waist-high barrel, and when I came out, a young woman dropped in on me. I straightened out so I would not hit her, but I guess she did not see me. When she kicked out her board, it hit me, and it slammed right into my face. With my upbringing in Virginia Beach, I learned to just shrug it off and didn't even say a thing to her. Val and I surfed Haleiwa for about 2.5, 3 hours. The current was wearing us out, so we took advantage of a little downtime and went into the town of Haleiwa and went shopping at all the surf shops and collecting T-shirts and doing the things that I love to do and Val loves to do too. But anyway, I think we're going to stop at the reading right there and pick up with Chapter 6 another time. Before I leave, I have a few words I wanted to share with you. The whole journey that man and woman make is the start of innocence, just as Adam and Eve started off innocent, not knowing, and experiencing an innocence that's given to us when we're born. But then sexuality and emotions happen. We grow into emotional human beings and spiritual human beings. But we go through emotional states first, and then we go through mental states and grow mentally in our older years as we grow up and go through college and experience life and get a job and everything like that. But a lot of people, that's kind of where it ends. Is they stop growing, and they I guess it's really a lot of mostly because people go away from religions, because when you're young, as I talk about in my Taoist videos, that when you're young, religion is forced upon you, and you're forced to be dependent, and then we grow older and we want to learn to be independent. And the Tao says that there's one more stage to our spiritual growth, our mental growth, and that is to learn to become interdependent. And interdependence can also lead you to understanding this theory that the Taoists call interconnectedness, and everything is interconnected and everything is flowing. But we start this journey in innocence. Then we go through the stages of rebellion and independency, and then it's our journey to basically to go through those things in life and at one point learn to be innocent again. But it's a different innocence. The first one was given. The second innocence is one that you earned, one that's forged through your experiences. And later, mostly for a lot of people, when they're I guess late in life, they return. Naturally, they go through all their sexual phases when they're young, then their mental phases, and then their everything else that I guess people go through. But everybody in one form returns, and if you don't completely return in this life, then I guess you're, it's just a guess, but you're probably bound to repeat those lessons in another life if we're granted such beauty. And it is a gift. Life is the most beautiful gift that can ever be given, but it has to be learned to view that from the second innocence. The second innocence is the one that you attain. The second innocence is the one that Jesus talks about being born again. But one thing to remember is that you have to die. There's a part of you, and that part of you is the ego. And I've learned these things through Eastern teachings, but they apply to the Western teachings just as well. Anyway, we start off with life as Adam, the same as Adam, because we're all sharing Adam's story and Eve's story. And then we end life coming back home and being innocent again. And being like Jesus, because Jesus is in the Western world is the one that brought us back home. In the Eastern world, there have been other masters. Buddha is the most famous, but he had his ways of bringing people back to this innocence. And Lao Tzu, who pretty much founded Taoism, he's the one in China that before Zen came along, before Buddhism came into existence in China, there was Taoism, and he was a great, wonderful teacher that believed that there were 4 stages to spiritual development, and that's the innocence, believing, and then being dependent and independent, and then returning and accepting that you will not know everything in this life. You'll just have to admit that some things are unknowable, and that's the beauty of life. It's going to always remain a mystery. Anyway, thank you again for joining me. Y'all take care. Thanks for listening. I love all of you. Take care.